What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Control Room. I'm your host, Esrael, and it's been a little over 2.5 weeks. Sorry about that. Graduation season has been kind of busy balancing that and the playoffs and work, but we are here. There's a lot to get to. I want to recap how the Mavericks ended their series against the Thunder because it lays the blueprint for how they're succeeding against the Timberwolves as of right now. They have a 2-0 series lead in the Western Conference Finals, and it's a pretty similar game plan. So I'm going to break all these numbers down. There's a lot to get to. We're going to start right now with the Mavs and the Thunder. They won that series 4-2. We'll break down how that series was decided and then take a look at the conference finals. So first, the Mavs storm OKC with some thunder in games 5 and 6. In game 5, Dallas never relinquished the lead after the first quarter en route to a 104-92 win, and they led by as many as 18 points. OKC was held to a season-low 92 points. That's across the regular season and the playoffs. Mark Daigneault started Isaiah Joe over Josh Giddey. Giddey's first career game coming off the bench. That was a source of criticism, at least a little bit, from talking heads, from analysts, as Joe and Giddey never seemed to be in a rhythm in Game 5, but it was just a way to see if the Thunder could do something different. Joe was playing well off the bench up until that point. Giddey had not been playing well in the starting lineup in terms of scoring, but it was just something different as they were dealing with the Mavs throwing all this size everywhere and taking advantage of mismatches. But then in Game 6, Dallas overcame a 17-point deficit and multiple double-digit deficits to end up winning by 1 point. Their 16-point halftime deficit was the largest in a series-clinching comeback win in franchise history. That's the fourth largest in NBA history. All right, then let's look at Luka Doncic personally. In Game 5, he went MVP on OKC. He had 31 points in Game 5 on 12 of 22 shooting, 54.5%, 5 of 11 from 3, 45.5%, 10 rebounds, 11 assists, only 3 turnovers, and a block. His 31 points were the most points in the series, and it was his first 30-point game in the series. His fourth 30-point game in the entire postseason, if you go all the way back to the Clippers series. It was his fourth career playoff game with 30 or more points and 10 or more assists on 50% field goal shooting or better. That tied the ninth most in NBA history since 1967, 1968, with Steph Curry, Russell Westbrook, Clyde Drexler, and the bad boy Detroit Piston Isaiah Thomas. It was his second game that series against OKC, shooting 50% from the floor and 45% or better from 3, and his third game this postseason with 5 or more threes made. It was also his third triple-double in the postseason and his 6th in his career. Now, that number is going to keep going up as we go along this episode. But it was the most triple-doubles in a single postseason in his career as he broke that tie with his playoff in 2020. He had 2 in 2020, 1 in 2022, and then at this point he had 3 in 2024. And we'll have more, as you will see soon. In Game 6, he scored 29 points on 9 of 15 shooting, 60% from the floor. 4 of 6 from 3, 66.7%. Not a lot of volume, but very efficient. 10 rebounds, 10 assists, and 2 steals. His third straight triple-double. See, it's going up now. 4th this postseason and 7th in his playoff career. Longest triple-double streak of his playoff career. It was also his 5th playoff career 25-point triple-double, which tied the second most all-time at age 25 or younger. Oscar Robertson had 7, LeBron James had 5. And then when we talk about the Minnesota series, this is going to change again. All right? Now, Game 5 against OKC, in the margins, in the paint, Dallas had a 48-44 advantage in paint points. When you look at their field goals in the paint, they shot 24 of 34, which is 70.6%. Their season average is 60.9%. So almost 10 entire percentage points higher than their season average. And they ranked second in the NBA in the regular season. in terms of paint field goal percentage. OKC, on the other hand, shot 22 of 36, which was 61.1% from inside the paint. And their season average was 59.4%, which was 6th in the NBA. So they are also really good in the paint. They were just above their average. However, the Mavs succeeded outrageously in the paint. Then, further into the margins we go. In the rebounding and the second chance, it was the Achilles heel for the Thunder. It had always been the Achilles heel for the Thunder all season long, and it came back to bite them in this series. In Game 5, Dallas had a 46-33 advantage in total rebounds, 37-25 advantage in defensive rebounds, and a 9-8 advantage in offensive rebounds. Then they had a 12-5 advantage in second chance points, where they shot 5 of 8 in second chance field goals, so 62.5%. Their playoff average in terms of second chance points per game is 13.9, which was the 4th among 16 playoff teams through Game 5. OKC, on the other hand, shot 2 of 7, 28.6%, on second chance field goals. Their playoff average was 10.4 second chance points per game, which was 12th among the 16 playoff teams through Game 5. So again, Dallas not only had more volume, but they were more likely to make you pay if they got an offensive rebound. And then in Game 6, Dallas was plus 16 in total rebounds, plus 9 in defensive rebounds, and plus 7 in offensive rebounds. And then they had a 27-8 advantage in second chance points. And I'm just going to add this note here. Kyrie Irving, 14-0 in closeout games in his playoff career. In case you didn't already know that, but that stat has been thrown everywhere. All right, now, Dallas had a lot of double-doubles and a triple-double in Game 5. This is something that I was a little curious about. Dallas had 1 triple-double and 3 double-doubles, and here's how that happened. Luka had 31 points, 10 rebounds, 11 assists. That is considered a double-double and a triple-double. PJ Washington had 10 points and 10 rebounds, so there's your second double-double. Derek Lively II had 11 points and 10 rebounds. There's your third double-double for the Mavericks in that game. It was the first time in playoff franchise history with 3 or more double-doubles and a triple-double, and only the 25th time in NBA playoff history. And teams are 20-5 in those games, at least up until that point. OKC gave up 3 double-doubles and a triple-double for only the 3rd time in their playoff franchise history, and they are 0-3 in those games. So it didn't really work out for them in Game 5. So I want to transition here to the series recap, really the story of the series. What actually happened when you take a look at the big picture of all these numbers? So the story of the series is defense and physicality, and then rebounding, turnovers, second chance points, points off turnovers. Those were the biggest keys in that series against the Thunder. The Mavericks had, in the regular season, 42.9 rebounds per game. The Thunder, 42.0 rebounds per game. Doesn't seem like much of a difference, but when you look at where the Mavericks rank compared to the Timberwolves, the Mavericks were 21st at 42.9. The Timberwolves weren't even a full rebound ahead of the Mavericks, and they were at 15th. So being 0.9 rebounds below Dallas put OKC near the bottom of the NBA in terms of rebounds per game. Turnovers per game, Dallas is really good at holding onto the ball. 12.5 turnovers per game. OKC the same way at 12.7. Second chance points per game, Dallas at 13.4. OKC at 11.8. And then points per game off turnovers, this is where the Thunder had an advantage because of how many turnovers they force. Dallas had 16.5 points per game off turnovers, while OKC had 20.5, and OKC led the league in that category. Now let's set the scene with some rebounding. Teams were 20-24 in the regular season when recording 44 or more rebounds versus OKC. Yes, when OKC was their opponent, teams were 20-24 when recording 44 or more rebounds. OKC had 25 total losses on the season. So 20 of those losses came when they gave up 44 rebounds. They, meaning the Thunder. OKC, when they were out-rebounded this season, was 28 and 22. 50 games played ties the third most in the NBA this season, but they had a 56% win percentage, which is second in the NBA behind Boston. That's the 11th best in NBA history among teams with 50 or more games out-rebounded in a season. OKC, whenever they out-rebound their opponents, at least in the regular season, they were 29 and 3, so it swung in their favor, which that's supposed to happen for every team. They had a 90.6 win percentage, which was the best in the NBA, and it tied the 14th best record in NBA history. At one point, it looked like had they stayed above 95%, they would have had the best record when out-rebounding opponents. But they fell to 90.6, which is still outstanding. Dallas, on the other hand, when they out-rebounded their opponents in the regular season, they were 28 and 9. When they were out-rebounded, they were 22 and 23 with a 48.9% win percentage, which was still the fourth best in the NBA. Yes, even if you're under 500 in those games, you're not supposed to be winning those games. Many teams don't win those games. So they were one of the best teams in getting around that rebounding issue. As we continue in the story of the series with rebounding, the Mavs had 45.2 rebounds per game in the series, which was the most in the second round for any team. They had 46.3 rebounds per game in their wins and 43.0 rebounds in their losses. The Thunder, on the other hand, 40.5 rebounds per game in the series, fourth fewest in the second round. And remember, there's 4 teams in the West, 4 teams in the East, so there's 8 teams there. So they were in the bottom half here. 48.5 rebounds per game in their wins, 36.5 rebounds per game in losses. That's a 12 rebound difference in your average between wins and losses. So clearly, rebounding was the name of the game for the Thunder, and for any opponent who wanted to overtake that matchup. Then, because of rebounding, second chance points is an ancillary issue that you have to pay attention to. Dallas had a plus 2.7 advantage in offensive rebounds per game versus OKC in the series. So they averaged 2.7 more offensive rebounds per game than OKC. The Mavericks had 16.2 second chance points versus OKC, which was the second most in the second round. And they had 17.3 second chance points in their 4 wins versus OKC. The Thunder had 11.3 second chance points versus Dallas, which was the 4th most in the second round. 19.0 second chance points in their 2 wins versus Dallas. All right, so even the Thunder at times can out-rebound you. They did against Dallas in their wins, and it allowed them to get those second chance points and really create a gap so that Dallas didn't have a chance of coming back, or at least taking those close wins, especially in that game 4 loss for Dallas. Then another aspect of the Thunder defense is how well they force turnovers. Even though the Mavericks are great at holding on to the ball, Mavericks turnovers was one piece of the story. The Mavericks and Thunder in the regular season, Dallas had 12.5 turnovers per game, 4th best in the NBA. OKC forced 15.7 turnovers per game, which was the most in the NBA. The Mavericks in the playoffs versus OKC had 14.0 turnovers per game in their wins, which was the most among remaining playoff teams at that point. 15.0 turnovers per game in losses, which was the most among remaining playoff teams. So OKC had a profound effect on Dallas when it came to turnovers. And the Mavs were still able to find a way to win, mainly because they weren't giving up 20 turnovers a game. And then the last piece of this story is the points off turnovers. The Mavericks had 13.0 points off turnovers versus OKC, which was the second fewest in the second round. 14.0 points off turnovers in wins versus OKC. Whereas the Thunder had 19.0 points off turnovers versus Dallas, which was the most in the second round. And in their wins against Dallas, they had 20.5 points off turnovers in their wins, their 2 wins versus Dallas. Now, remember, based on the chart, based on the graph that I had put together to make sure that I keep up with these regular season stats, OKC had 20.5 points per game off turnovers in the regular season and led the league. So to have about 20.5 in their 2 wins against Dallas means that they were right on par with their average. And they weren't able to keep that up the entire series. That was one of the reasons why OKC did not prevail in that best of 7 series. So, although they weren't able to capitalize on points off turnovers as much as they normally do, the biggest issue for the Thunder was their size, was their ability to rebound, crash the glass, get the second chance points, because the more miscellaneous categories that you can capitalize on, the easier it's going to be for you to score some points. And sometimes that's going to make or break a game, and one game can decide an entire series, as Indiana has found issues with when they turned over the ball in game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals to Boston. As you rack up those turnovers, you eventually allow your opponent to overtake you. And Boston was able to steal back a game at home, one that the Pacers should have had. Makes you think about 10 years ago when the Pacers gave up that buzzer-beating layup to LeBron and the Miami Heat. How could that series have changed? Because that ended up being Miami in 7, which led them to the NBA Finals, whereas the Pacers might think, you know what, we had a shot at the finals had we not blown that game. This series, they might be thinking the same thing, although they have, in my opinion, less of a chance against Boston. This is how I feel about the Thunder. If you can make up those gaps, you know what you need now, and Sam Presti is going to make an adjustment in his roster, tweak it a little bit so that they can fix that problem. Once they fix that problem, the Thunder might be one of the most unstoppable teams next season and beyond, especially with how young they are. And a lot of people don't like hearing that the Thunder are young, but they're actually one of the youngest teams in terms of average age of the roster. If it's not bottom 2, if it's not youngest 2, it's definitely youngest 3. 2 seasons ago, their average age was younger than the University of Texas men's basketball program. That's what we mean by they're a young team, not necessarily the age between Shea and Luka or their oldest player versus the Mavs' oldest player. It's strictly about average age. We get a report every morning about the average age of a roster, and the Clippers had one of the oldest average ages, and you can tell based on how old their superstars were compared to the average age of the Thunder, who were one of the youngest teams. You can look at teams like Detroit or Orlando who have a lot of young guys. That's going to happen, and with that comes a little bit of inexperience. This is a perfect test for them that they can now look back on and say, what can we do better? How can we prepare ourselves for a longer run the next time around, as long as they can keep that core together? And because they're still, a lot of them are still pretty fresh on their early contracts, their rookie contracts, they probably still have some cap space. I'm going to have to do a little bit more research on that. They have a lot of draft picks. They can trade how they see fit. There's a future for OKC, and it's very bright. So that was such a fun season to watch the Thunder, especially blossom in the 2 years that I've been with Bally Sports. I've been able to see OKC in their rough stages as they've been improving, and now as they're blossoming. And it's been nothing but a joyride for me to see that Thunder team really excel in the way that they have this season. And I look forward to hopefully having some more, especially working with all the people that are involved in that organization. Now, we will transition to the Western Conference Finals between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Dallas Mavericks, because the same points I gave against the Thunder, it's probably going to work against the Wolves. The Mavericks have moved on to the Western Conference Finals to take on the team that took down the defending champions in the Denver Nuggets, the Minnesota Timberwolves. And so I am not sure how many people had the Mavericks and the Wolves in this round. I certainly did not expect the Wolves to beat the Nuggets in 7, although those first 2 games were quite convincing, and they eventually were able to pull out wins in Game 6 and Game 7. So credit to those guys. Now we have a situation on our hands. Let's take a look at Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, a recap between the Mavs and the Timberwolves. Neither team had a double-digit lead in this game. There were 14 lead changes and 7 ties. Something that struck me was that I was noticing a shift in both the identity of the Mavs and the Wolves, not only in the paint, but from 3. And so I've broken down numbers for both teams as best as I possibly can. All right, so in Game 1, Dallas had 62 paint points, which was a playoff high, and the most in the playoffs since the first round, Game 7 at the LA Clippers in 2021. All right, by playoff high, I mean playoff high this season. So that's still a ridiculous number, 62 paint points in a game. In 2022 to 23, in the regular season, the Mavs only scored 42.8 paint points per game, which was last in the NBA. This season, in the regular season, they scored 47.4 paint points per game, which was 24th in the NBA. And since February 10th, when they acquired PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, they scored 50.8 paint points per game, which was 10th in the NBA in that span. Minnesota, on the other hand, had 38 paint points, which was the third fewest this postseason. When you juxtapose that to their regular season numbers, it's kind of jarring because last season, 22-23, they averaged 54.3 paint points per game, which tied 7th in the NBA. This season, they had 50.8 points per game in the paint. That was 12th in the NBA, and 50.7 paint points per game since February 10th, also the trade deadline, 11th in the NBA. Now, when I say trade deadline, again, let me just clarify. February 8th was the trade deadline, but February 10th was when most of those players were available and were able to put on a jersey and actually play in the game. Now let's take a look in the shift in the identities of these teams from 3. Dallas shot 6 of 25 from 3 in Game 1. That was only 24%. However, in the past, as in last season, they would have made 6 threes and decided to shoot 40 of them. Their three-point rate in this game was 28.7%. So again, let me just break these numbers down one more time. 6 of 25 from 3, 24% from the floor, from 3. 28.7% three-point rate. It was a playoff season low in both makes and attempts, 6 and 25 respectively. It tied their season low, regular season and playoffs, in makes, and it ties a season low for the last 2 seasons. So since the start of the 22-23 season, it was the fewest three-point attempts, their 25 threes, since January 1st of 2022. And in 22-23, they averaged 41.0 3-point field goal attempts per game, the third most in the NBA. This season, that number dropped a little bit to 39.5 3-point attempts per game, which was second most in the NBA. And their three-point rate was 44.1%, which was second highest in the NBA. However, since February 10th, that three-point rate dropped to 41.9%, and before then it was 45.4%. What these numbers mean is that they're taking less threes as the season goes on. As they have more size in the interior, they're not going to shoot as many threes. They're going to be a bit more selective. And for them to only attempt 25 threes really showcases that. Minnesota, on the other hand, a team that lives in the paint, as I had mentioned a few minutes ago. Minnesota shot 18 of 49, 36.7% from 3, with a 55.1% three-point rate in Game 1. That was a playoff season high in both makes, 18, and attempts, 49. It was a regular season and a playoff high in attempts with 49. That seems ridiculous. Just hearing the number 49 three-point attempts. It was the second most attempts through the regular season and the playoffs in the last 2 seasons for Minnesota. In 22-23, they only attempted 33.3 threes per game, which was 15th most in the NBA. This season, in the regular season, it was 32.7 three-point field goal attempts per game, which was 23rd in the NBA, and their three-point rate was 38.4%, which put them at 17th in the NBA. All those numbers to say, Minnesota doesn't shoot a lot of threes. I don't care what Kat says about being the best shooting big man in the league. They don't shoot a lot of threes compared to the rest of the league. But the scoring discrepancies in Game 1 were staggering, right? Because Dallas had 62 points in the paint and shot 31 of 49, 63.3% in the paint. They scored 74 points from 2 and then 16 of 17 from the free throw line, which was 94.1%, probably their best free throw shooting night of the playoffs. Minnesota, on the other hand, generated 48 points from 3 from behind the arc and only 40 points from 2 while shooting 11 of 18, 61.1% from the free throw line. Now, how do you nullify the paint or the three-point line? I've given these percentages multiple times this entire season. If the attempts are even, then 60% from 2 and 40% from 3 cancel each other out. That is just mathematics. Dallas had 49 paint field goal attempts and shot 63.3%. 37 of 62, 59.7% from 2 overall. In the regular season, the Mavs averaged 60.9% in the paint, second in the NBA. Minnesota had 49 three-point field goal attempts. All right, Dallas had 49 in the paint. Minnesota had 49 from outside. And they shot 36.7%. Now, if you're shooting 36.7% from outside and the other team is shooting 63.3% from the paint, who's going to score more points? It's not the team shooting 3. I'm sorry, 3 is only more than 2 if you make it. That was the point I had been making since episode 1, and it showed itself in game 1, but it flipped because you would expect these teams the Dallas team to have the three-point identity and Minnesota to have the paint identity. That's not what happened in game 1. And who won that game? I rest my case. Moving on. Points off turnovers. Minnesota scored 9 points off 13 Dallas turnovers. Abysmal. Dallas scored 14 points off of 10 Minnesota turnovers. Now, remember, I had done this stat many episodes ago, but it was intriguing to me. Every playoff team since 2018 has generated at least 1 point per opponent turnover. So if your ratio, if that similar ratio is below 1, you are in trouble. You are in a lot of trouble. The defense in the fourth quarter was also something to take into account. Minnesota led by 1 entering the fourth quarter. The Mavericks had a 91.7 defensive rating in that quarter. The Wolves, on the other hand, had a 108.3 defensive rating. And if you look at the regular season defensive rankings, how is this possible? Minnesota had the number 1 defense all season long. However, Dallas had the number 1 defense in the last 20 games of the regular season. So to those who had been watching the Mavs, or at least were aware of what was going on in Dallas, doesn't really surprise you. However, it's just absurd how well the Mavericks were able to play down the stretch and how the Timberwolves were not. And that's going to come back in Game 2. Now let's take a look at Game 2 and get my quick reaction because I am recording this just hours after that game ended. Dallas now leads the series 2-0. First, I'm going to talk about Luka because the triple-doubles have come back again. Luka got his 5th triple-double this postseason and his 8th in his playoff career with 32 points, 10 rebounds, and 13 assists. His 4th career 30-point triple-double and his 2nd this postseason. Dallas was down by as many as 18 points. They led for only 9 minutes and 49 seconds in Game 1 and only 5 minutes and 42 seconds in Game 2. What team on planet Earth is able to lead through 2 games in a series for only 15 and a half minutes, and they're the ones that are up 2-0? Blows my mind. Well, here's why. Dallas was 10-30 in the regular season when trailing after 3 quarters. When you hear 10-30, you're like, that's an awful record. That's only 25% of their games being wins in that situation. However, most teams don't win when they're losing entering the 4th quarter. Their 10 wins actually tied the 2nd most wins in the NBA. But in this postseason, they're 4-3. And then in the clutch, they were 23-9 in the clutch in the regular season, which was the 2nd best record in the NBA. In the playoffs, they are 5-2. 5-2. That's the 3rd best in the NBA. And one of the teams that's ahead of them is New York, who's no longer in the playoffs. Now let's look at everyone's 3-point shooting and break it down by half. Because when I saw it, I was really wowed here. In the first half, Dallas shot 4 of 14 from 3. Minnesota shot 8 of 17 from 3. In the second half, the numbers were the same, except flipped. Dallas had 8 of 17 from 3. Minnesota, 4 of 14 from 3. What? That might be the story of the game right there. If it weren't for the late game turnovers, bad execution, and the fouls, all of that. All right, then points in the paint. Again, Dallas had 54 paint points, while Minnesota had 42 paint points. And then if we look at Minnesota's playoff splits, they're 6-0 in this postseason when matching or outscoring opponents in the paint. But when they are outscored in the paint, the Wolves are 2-5. So we're starting to see a pattern here. The Wolves have to be able to score in the paint to have a chance. Because Dallas is not going to allow that to happen because they've made it a point to score in the paint. They're not going to settle for threes like they would in the past. Then if you look at points off turnovers, again, all of these points, everything that I'm talking about right now with the Wolves, the Mavs had to do all that with the Thunder. And so it's showing itself again in the Western Conference Finals. Points off turnovers, Dallas scored 13 points off 9 Minnesota turnovers. Minnesota scored only 9 points off 10 Dallas turnovers. Now, in both games, Minnesota has not been able to score at least 1 point per opponent turnover. When Minnesota was outscored in points off turnovers in the regular season, they were 20-19. But in the playoffs, they're now 3-5. So there's a lot that Minnesota can work on, especially because, yeah, they lost both games and at home. That's the bad part. The good part for them is that they've lost by a combined total of 4 points. Despite having an 18-point lead, that's another story for another day. But these games are still tight. And so a couple plays here, a couple plays there, a little more efficiency, a little better shot selection, less turnovers here and there, that could swing the game in Minnesota's favor. And so I don't think this series is over. There will be adjustments. It's just a matter of execution because Minnesota is not executing properly, especially down the stretch. And no coaching can overcome that. So we'll just have to wait and see how that team plays when they return to Dallas. But how these teams will adjust in games 3 and 4, for Dallas, they're seeing either drop coverage or blitzes. It was mainly drop coverage in game 1, a little more blitz in game 2. Drop coverage, which means that that when you're in the pick and roll, the defender that is guarding the center or the player that's setting the pick, setting the screen, is dropping back into the paint to protect the lob. Because if they were to put 2 on the ball, right, blitz the ball handler, then the screener would be left open at the basket. And let's say someone was able to rotate from the baseline, from their help position. Then in the short roll, which is at the nail, the free throw line, they can catch the pass from the ball handler in the pick and roll and then kick it out to the wing. Derek Lively is outstanding when he executes this. So when you run drop coverage, you risk that. You risk, or at least you don't risk. You're trying to protect that. But what you do risk is the ball handler being able to just throw floaters on you like James Harden did in Game 4 against the Mavericks. When you decide to blitz, right, then you leave somebody open at the rim. These blitzes leave mismatches on the wing, easy decisions for bigs, again, on that short roll. So that's something that the Mavs were able to do, especially that last pick and roll where Luka dropped that 3 on Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert was not originally guarding Luka Doncic. It was Jaden McDaniels. Derek Lively was coming up for the screen when Luka called for it, and then Lively was able to get Jaden McDaniels away from Luka Doncic, and so Rudy Gobert was all on an island, all by himself. And it was Luka's show at that point. We knew a step back three was coming, and that was it for the game. For the Mavericks, they have the options of drop coverage, or at least to counter drop coverage with those floaters, with those easy baskets for Luka and Kyrie. And they will find their openings no matter what. If they blitz, Luka is one of the best passers in the NBA. He will find an open man. He knows where everyone is supposed to be. One of the things that the Mavericks can do, I had put this down before Game 2 even happened. They just need to, well, not just, but they can get the Wolves in foul trouble. And we saw that happen pretty early for Karl Anthony Towns. Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns are 3rd and 4th, respectively, among centers in personal fouls per game in the playoffs. That's including Game 2 of the conference finals. So if you're able to continually draw fouls on the best defenders of the Wolves, you're setting yourself up for more success. Now, Minnesota, when they play Dallas, right, Dallas is packing the paint. So they either need to get the Mavs in foul trouble, ironic that I just mentioned, how the Wolves are in foul trouble, or shoot better from outside if they're going to take a lot of threes. But they should also make an effort to drive to score more in the paint. They made more of an effort this time around, and they had an 18-point lead. And then generate turnovers to get easy baskets, because sometimes the shots that you try to get in the half court are just not going to work. But then when you get those opportunities, you got to score, because they're not scoring. And they're not scoring because they're not generating 1 point per opponent turnover. That ratio is important. You cannot succeed scoring 9 points off 13 turnovers. It's just not going to happen. All right? So those are some things that we should look out for in games 3 and 4 in Dallas. And then after those games, I'll put out another episode updating the Western Conference Finals. Hopefully it's not a sweep just so that we have more time to kind of enjoy this round. But I mean, if it is a sweep, well, okay then. Before we leave this segment, I want to revisit the second round predictions that I had made, because unfortunately, 2 of them were wrong. My first one's wrong. This postseason, I'm a little sad about it, but it's okay. In the Eastern Conference of my second round bracket, between the number 1 Celtics and number 4 Cavaliers, I had the Celtics in 6. The Celtics ended up winning in 5. Of course, Donovan Mitchell was out for about half the series. Jared Allen was not available with the rib injury. Cleveland has dealt with injury all series long. But Boston did what Boston was supposed to do. They ended up beating the Cavs. Did it in 5 games. Number 2, Knicks, and number 6, Pacers. I originally had Knicks in 6. The Pacers ended up winning in 7. So that's where everything fell apart. The Knicks had a 3-2 series lead, allowed Indiana to force a Game 7. And then Indiana had the best, literally, statistically, the best shooting night in the playoffs in NBA history with a 64.1% field goal percentage. That was the most outrageous thing I'd ever seen. But credit to them. They deserve it. They were the better team in the series. Yes, New York was injured. That doesn't matter. They had an opportunity to close out Indiana in 6 games, and they didn't do it. But at full strength, you hope to see the Knicks come out and have even more playoff success, although with Tom Thibodeau running these guys into the ground, they do play a lot of minutes per game. It's kind of outrageous how he's allowed to just keep doing that. The Pacers are not to be slept on. They were the best scoring offense all year long, number 1 in points per game. And based on how Tyrese Halliburton's injury pans out, it could be a long series, but if he's out, it could be a lot shorter. We'll get into those predictions later. Now let's move to the Western Conference, the number 1 Thunder and the number 5 Mavericks. I had Mavericks in 6. The Mavericks won in 6. This was the only one that I had gotten right on the money in terms of winner and games played. And then the number 2 Nuggets and number 3 Timberwolves, I had Nuggets in 6. And then after they let go of game 1, I had adjusted that to Nuggets in 7, although my NBA.com bracket still said Nuggets in 6. The Timberwolves made fools of all of us. They won that series in 7. And that, sure, if the Nuggets had won at least one of those games at home to start the series, yeah, this would have been a different story. But they didn't. They just didn't. And down the stretch, Minnesota was able to make more plays than Denver did. It's honestly just that simple. And Anthony Edwards just took over in a way that most people did not see coming in a Game 7, although we knew he had the confidence to do it, the moxie to do it. He balled out. And at least at the very end, the entire team played really well. It's not like Anthony Edwards had the greatest night in Game 7. He did not have the greatest Game 7. But he made the plays necessary to win that game and win that series and be in the spot that they're in now. So credit to the Timberwolves there. However, that does mean that I don't have them making the NBA Finals because Dallas is on the other side. Whoa, did I just spoil that? Those predictions are coming in the next segment. Stick around. The next 2 episodes will include a conference finals update for both the East and the Western Conference, but mainly the Western Conference. And the other one is going to be an interview with the Basketball Hall of Famer, Nancy Lieberman. Yes, she was so gracious coming onto the show, and it was awesome hearing her stories and hearing about her experience, getting her knowledge and insight into the game of basketball, and to see what she thinks about the evolution of the point guard, the women's game, the way OKC had played, as she is an analyst on Valley Sports Oklahoma for Thunder Live. And so I've gotten to work with her on numerous occasions. It was a blast being able to talk to her for that interview. So that's coming up soon. Now, I'm making my picks for the Eastern Conference Finals and the Western Conference Finals. And I want you guys to keep in mind, I had already made these picks by the time the series started. I just couldn't get an episode out. I've sent the text to my friends. They know it. I've told coworkers. I have witnesses. But I wanted to get this out on tape and make sure that it's on the record. The number 1 Celtics and the number 6 Pacers, I have the Celtics winning in 7. Even if the Celtics played the Knicks, I would have had the Celtics winning that series. But because it's the Pacers originally, my thought was the Pacers give Boston a little bit of trouble, especially with their pace. And if the Celtics were not shooting well for a particular reason, maybe Indiana's defense was playing up to snuff for that particular game, Indiana could steal a couple of those games and extend the series longer than people would expect. On top of that, Indiana is undefeated at home, and it's not easy to win at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. But with Tyrese Halliburton's hamstring injury, he's questionable for Game 3. I don't know if he's going to play yet. If he's out, the Celtics are probably going to win in 5. The Pacers might be able to get a game with their ability to shoot the ball. They can still run an offense. TJ McConnell is not someone that you want to sleep on. He can still run that offense really well. It's just that Tyrese Halliburton, for a good portion of the season, has been able to assist so much without turning the ball over that he is the focal point of that Pacers offense. So without him, I don't know how long the Pacers have in this series. Boston is already up 2-0. Either way, I have the Celtics winning. Still going to say in 7 in case Halliburton plays, but if he doesn't, it's probably going to be in 5. In the Western Conference Finals, this took me a little while to figure out, but I had my pick the night before, the day before, essentially, this series started. So between the number 3 Timberwolves and the number 5 Mavericks, I have the Mavericks in 6. You might say I'm a homer. I don't care. The numbers are the numbers. Everything in my analysis all season long has been statistical, analytical, and based on the numbers that I keep seeing, and based on the trends that I'm seeing from both teams, I don't see how the Mavericks can lose this series unless Anthony Edwards goes superhuman. And not only does he have to go superhuman, Karl Anthony Towns cannot shoot 25% from the floor and be in foul trouble all the time. Rudy Gobert cannot be in foul trouble all the time. Naz Reid is not going to go on a tear of 7 for 8 from 3 every single game. Although he is the 6th man of the year, he is a good 3-point shooter. Dallas has not had one of those games where everything was just clicking. They've been able to hang around and then overtake their opponent in the final minutes, in the clutch, like they've done all season long. And based on this matchup, even though Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns and Naz Reid provide size, and that is what OKC lacked, the formula is still the same, because if you can get them out of the paint, it's as if they're not on the floor. And that is to the Mavericks' advantage, especially because they choose to go into the paint. Same thing that I've been saying over and over. What does this mean? I have the number 1 Celtics and the number 5 Mavericks facing off in the NBA Finals. Now, the Celtics have always been my champion. An early prediction for me would be Celtics in 6. I will revisit that prediction once we know for sure who makes the finals. But this Mavericks team, I mean, for them to get this far is... I've said before on this show that their ceiling is the NBA Finals based on matchups. It all depended on matchups. And then because of the way that the bracket shook out, I thought the Western Conference Finals would be as far as they go. But now we've hit this point where it's absolutely feasible that the Mavs could make the NBA Finals. And everything that I've talked about in this episode is going to be the way that they punch their ticket there. So those are my predictions. But this episode is not over because I do want to go over the All-NBA teams, the All-Defense teams, and the All-Rookie teams. So the 2023-24 All-NBA first team consists of Giannis Antetokounmpo, Luka Doncic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nikola Jokic, and Jason Tatum. And then All-NBA second team consists of Jalen Brunson, Anthony Davis, Kevin Durant, Anthony Edwards, Kawhi Leonard. Then All-NBA third team is Devin Booker, Stephen Curry, Tyrese Halliburton, LeBron James, and Domantas Sabonis. And when it comes to Halliburton, I had made a point in February about how his hamstring injury could prevent him from getting that $41 million contract extension in the Supermax portion of his deal that he could sign. Now that he's made All-NBA, he is eligible for that Supermax. And that, based on everything he's had to go through with the 65-game rule, it's a sigh of relief, I'm sure, for him. Yeah, $41 million, most people are going to be like, okay, it's $41 million on top of everything he's already going to get. But $41 million is $41 million. You saw how they played for the in-season tournament. It was only $500K. These guys will do a lot for $41 million. All right, now let's take a look at all defense. All defensive first team was awarded to Bam Adebayo, Anthony Davis, Rudy Gobert, Herb Jones, the New Orleans Pelicans, Herb Jones. Congrats, brother. And Victor Wembanyama. Wembanyama became the first rookie in NBA history to be selected to the all-defensive first team. What can I say? That kid is insane. All right, then all-defensive second team. Alex Caruso, Drew Holiday, Jaden McDaniels, Jalen Suggs, who's been a great defender all season long, and Derek White. Those of you who have been watching Lou Dort, as I have, may ask the question, where was Lou? Where was Dort in all of this voting? He was unfortunately 2 total points behind Drew Holiday in the voting, and Drew Holiday was fifth among the second team winners. So Lou Dort just narrowly missed the cut for all defense. And it is hard to see, especially considering how well he had played on defense all year long. I don't know who you take off this all defensive team, though. I really don't. So it's a difficult ballot. I mean, there are a lot of good players. So that's just how the dice rolls. Let's move on to all rookie. And I want to correct myself for something I had gotten wrong weeks ago, but didn't really find out until maybe a month ago, and then never, ever addressed it again. Rookies are not subjected to the 65-game rule when it comes to all rookie. So I thought Derek Lively was no longer eligible once he had missed his 18th game of the season. That was not true. And when I read off all these names, you'll understand. So all rookie first team: Chet Holmgren, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Brandon Miller, Brandon Podziemski, and Victor Wembanyama. And then all rookie second team consisted of Keontae George, Baylor guy, Gigi Jackson II, Derek Lively II, well-deserved, Amen Thompson, and Cason Wallace. So congratulations to all of those players who got awarded All-NBA, All-Defense, All-Rookie. Those are high honors that are not bestowed on very many people, very many players. And so they'll take this in stride. It's going to be another check mark on their goals list. Congrats to all those guys. And then before we go, I do want to mention the Dallas Stars reached the Western Conference Final. Currently, they are down in the series 1-0, losing the first game at home in double overtime, 32 seconds in with that Connor McDavid goal. That was not fun to watch late at night. But the Stars have lost a couple games at home to start a series and then come back to win in 7. Hopefully it doesn't take that long this time around against Edmonton. But if you are into hockey, the best team in the West is still on the ice. and they play on Saturday, which if you're watching this as soon as this comes out or listening to it as soon as it comes out, that's today. So why not give it a look? All right, that does it for me for this episode. Thanks again for sticking around, for watching, for listening, coming through this entire playoff journey. This has been very fun to recap every series as much as possible. And there's still plenty more to go. We are nowhere near done. Well, we're almost done, but we're not exactly done. There's more to go. All right. Again, we're going to do this through the NBA Finals, no matter who it is. So buckle up. It's going to be a great ride. All right. That does it for me. This has been The Control Room. I'm your host, Esrael Johannes, signing off.